Good morning. Can everyone hear me? Great. So I'm going to speak this morning about the four most significant opportunities that marketers have to create value through large-scale data analysis, through technology, and marketing in real time. And in just a few minutes, I'm going to invite X+1's own Leon Zemel to join me on stage, and he's going to share some of his specific experiences doing exactly that. Since I guess that for at least a few of you in the audience, this may be the first time that you've ever heard of my firm, Netezza, I'd like to just briefly explain why it is that I hope you'll want to get to know us a little bit better. Netezza invented and launched the world's first data warehouse appliance in 2003, and we did it in the face of tremendous incumbent competition from Oracle, Teradata, IBM, and Microsoft. And if you think about it, entering a market dominated by those entrenched competitors was really pretty audacious. So in order to get any traction in the market whatsoever, it would not have been good enough to introduce a new offering that was merely 10% cheaper or offered twice the performance. We had to introduce a new offering that was orders of magnitude better. And that's exactly what we did. And that's why I love this quote, because innovation is the lifeblood of our business. Today, Netezza is a $300 million enterprise with over 500 customers globally. We're the fastest growing data warehousing company in the world. And the digital media segment of our business, the segment that focuses on helping marketers address their large-scale data analysis challenges, we started that a little less than 3 years ago. It's now the largest segment of our business. As some of you may have heard, IBM recently acquired Netezza for $1.7 billion, so business is good. So I'm going to speak today about how data-centric strategies create value. Value for marketers as individuals, and value for our firms. I'm going to talk about it at a fairly tactical level with some specificity. But before doing that, I wanted to just briefly look at the issue through the strategic lens, because I think that's also important. So the strategic value of data lies in the fact that it's a source of uniqueness. And uniqueness is critically important because if your competitors are unable to appropriate what it is that you do, right, that gives you a tremendous source of bargaining power. Right? And that's why commodity offerings are priced low and unique offerings are often priced high. Right? Unique data, therefore, is a source of competitive advantage. And it could be data about your customers, data about your market, your prospects, your competitors. Importantly, when you're able to enrich your unique data with unique analysis, that's even better. That creates more differentiation, more competitive advantage. So I think by now we're all familiar with Terry Kawaja's eye chart that depicts the display advertising technology landscape. The important point that I want to make here is that as you look across all the firms listed here, nearly every one of them is attempting to differentiate themselves by leveraging unique data and analysis of that data in order to help marketers solve their problems. So it's a compelling data point that, again, helps illustrate the benefits of uniqueness and data-centric strategies for creating competitive advantage. Before I move on, I want to, as an aside, just highlight that if you get out a magnifying glass and look very closely, down there in the bottom, you'll see that Netezza's logo is in there. And if you look even more closely, I'm thrilled by this, you'll notice that none of our competitors made the cut. So again, another data point illustrating the benefits of uniqueness. So as we all know, and as Bruce just described, right, the very nature of marketing is changing, right, because marketing and data analysis are now inexorably intertwined. And what that means for all of us individually as marketers is that in the future, many of our most critical marketing challenges will in fact be technology challenges. So let's take a look at this short video that helps explain why this is true.
What we know about our planet, and particularly what we can know about each and every one of its inhabitants, increases, multiplies with every action and transaction that occurs. Today's technologies are fully capable of capturing relevant information about nearly all interactions occurring anywhere in the world. Unfortunately, this capability to collect information far exceeds our ability to make it work for us. Every day, a tidal wave of data hits systems in the face continually, without mercy, as it flows continuously from millions of individual interactions into the billions of high-volume, multifaceted data streams. This is information that is captured, but not necessarily tamed.
So taming that information, taming that data, is one of the most critical challenges that modern marketers face. Right? Now, fortunately, it's not only a challenge, it's also an opportunity, right? Because marketers that invest in analyzing that digital exhaust, that data, are able to better calculate the ROI on their multi-channel marketing campaign investments and make better decisions about how to allocate their spend across channels. It also enables smart marketers to leverage direct response and predictive analysis techniques in order to achieve dramatic increases in targeting precision and therefore in the performance of their campaigns. But of course, it's not easy. In fact, Forrester recently reported that 75% of CMOs are rearranging their teams this year in order to keep pace with the demands of digital media. As we talk to our customers, one of the most significant changes that we see CMOs making is that they're increasingly hiring people that look like this. Okay, so this is Hal Varian. He's a famous mathematician. He's a former Berkeley professor. He's now the chief economist at Google. And he attracted a lot of attention a few years ago when he started promoting this idea that the sexy job in the next 10 years will be statisticians. And the fact is, he's right. Mathematicians, statisticians, data scientists, they're increasingly moving out of the back office and into positions of significant leadership and influence in their organizations. And in fact, I would go so far as to say that every great CMO today needs to have one of these guys in their back pocket. Right? Now, the challenge is that these resources are scarce. Right? They're hard to find. In fact, in talking to our customers, what we see more often than not is that in-source versus outsource decision is really taking the back seat to the simple challenge of finding the talent. In fact, we have customers that are attempting to crowdsource this talent. Not that the crowds that are available to source from are particularly large, but what it means is that if you're a CMO of a firm that's based in LA and you find a world-class PhD statistician, or better yet, a team of statisticians that happen to be located in Romania or Russia, and they don't want to relocate, you're going to find creative ways to make that work, right? Because the talent is the premium. So why are these resources so scarce? It's because the technologies and methodologies that are required to analyze big data didn't exist 10 years ago. Most of them didn't exist 5 years ago. In fact, if you look at this Google Trends chart on the term big data, you'll see that it only started gaining in popularity a couple of years ago. Similarly, if you look at this chart on the term analytics, you'll see it only started gaining in popularity, about 4 years ago? Which begs the question, and what changed? Right? What initiated this trend? Well, before I give you my answer to that question, let me provide just a little additional context. Wikipedia defines big data as data sets that grow so large that they become awkward to work with using traditional database management tools. I love that word, awkward. So let me give you a specific example of this awkwardness that's relevant to marketers. So of course, it involves alcohol. Sampling can be a great thing if you're in a bar, you're talking about sampling beers, right? But sampling as a technique for digital marketers to analyze very large data sets, most often it's a terrible idea, right? And there are many reasons that that's true. Of course, it depends on the specific nature of the solution that you're pursuing. I'll give you one specific example, though. Sampling breaks attribution analysis. Right? If you're analyzing your campaign performance and the impression that you throw out of your sample happens to be the impression that tells you that it was your email channel or your display channel or whatever channel that was moving the needle on campaign conversions, your analysis is going to be flawed. Right? And the decisions that you make based on that analysis are going to be bad decisions, and your campaign performance is going to suffer. So just one example. Right? Back to my original question, what changed? Well, two things changed. The first was technology innovation in the area of massively parallel computing. And as an aside, that's where my company focuses. But this technology innovation dramatically reduced the awkwardness of analyzing large data sets. It's innovation in hardware systems and software systems that enabled a much broader audience of individuals to analyze larger data sets, right, with much higher performance, much greater simplicity, less awkwardness, at a much lower price point. So that was the first change. The second was that the business value being created by that analysis grew to a magnitude such that the macroeconomic impact could no longer be ignored. So this is an article in The Economist talking about that macroeconomic impact. Put another way, business leaders began to recognize that, as Tim O'Reilly says, the company with the most data wins. Which brings me to a really important point. As our industry's conversation around this topic of big data continues, I think it's critically important that we all be mindful of the fact that it's not just about the big, not just about data. That term big data, it encourages a focus on data volume, on data scale. The fact is, from a marketer's perspective, data only creates value when you're able to analyze it rapidly, gain new insights from that analysis, right, make better decisions as a result of those insights, and then act on those decisions. Right? So it's not so much about the big, it's really about performance. It's about reducing data latency. And in fact, reducing data latency is proven to create significant marketing value. The best example of this phenomena that I've heard from our customers, it goes like this. The difference between marketing in real time versus traditional marketing is like the difference between watching your favorite game from the stands versus watching it later at home on TV. Right? Real-time marketing enables you to get closer to your customers, to react more quickly, to deliver a more compelling and interactive and relevant set of interactions with your customers. And as we all know, delivering those compelling interactions, those relevant interactions with your customers is more important today than it has ever been because the stakes are higher, right? We've all seen the amplifying effects of social media on consumer power. Right? It means that great marketing goes viral. Unfortunately, it also means that terrible marketing can go viral. So as marketers, it's more important than ever that we remain laser focused on delivering this one thing, relevance. Right? Because relevance is what makes the difference between great marketing and terrible marketing. And as we all know, one size does not fit all. The fact is, marketing in real time increases relevance. And the good news for marketers today is that the data and technology now exists to deliver relevance in ways previously not possible. So where should a marketer focus today in order to deliver this relevance? As we look across our customer landscape, there are really just 4 classes of problems that are consistently at the top of the list of priorities. They're solving the data aggregation problem, the segmentation problem, the matching problem, and the bidding problem. And the reason for this is simple. It's because marketers that invest in solving these 4 problems create an essential foundation for differentiating their firms from the competition and creating value in the form of strategic customer insight. So let's take a look at each of these in turn. First, the data aggregation problem. This is the problem, and you heard Bruce Beagle speak about this earlier. This is the problem that's created by the hugely fragmented marketing technology ecosystem that's required in order to solve our modern marketing problems. Simply put, our marketing tools don't talk to each other. Our search engine marketing tools don't talk to our web analytics tools. Our email marketing platforms don't talk to our buying platforms for display advertising. This creates critical problems for marketers because as long as our marketing tools are operating on these independent data sets, much of the value in that underlying data is being lost. Right? It breaks the attribution analysis problem. It makes it impossible to solve the attribution analysis problem. It makes it nearly impossible to deliver coherent, cohesive, relevant messages across a multi-channel marketing campaign. This is something that you heard John mention earlier. You're releasing a new offering this summer, right, that helps solve this problem. So, and that goes to my point, which is that smart marketers that are able to unify these data silos, right, are able to transform all of that underlying data into a strategic marketing asset. And importantly, the more quickly you're able to aggregate your data and analyze it and act on it, the more value you're able to create as a marketer. You're marketing in real time. Next, let's talk about the segmentation problem. Now, I know that I don't need to discuss the value of segmentation with an audience full of marketers, but I do want to highlight one important point, which is that in today's, our modern digital world, nearly every marketing channel is by definition a direct response channel. And what that means is that as marketers, we should all be incorporating all of that digital exhaust data that I referenced earlier into our segment definitions. And importantly, we should be constantly resegmenting with the most recently available digital exhaust data because the audience behaviors reflected in that digital exhaust are constantly changing. And only by incorporating the most recent changes in that data into our targeting framework in near real time are we able to maximize campaign performance. So it's yet another example of a scenario in which increasing analytic performance, marketing in real time, translates directly into business value for marketers. So next we have the matching problem. Marketing is, at its heart, a matching problem, right? Marketers are constantly attempting to match the right message with the right person at the right time. And I really want to emphasize the importance of the time factor in that equation. The reason it's so critically important is that your target audiences are constantly moving through conversion funnels, right? And so delivering the relevant message, the right message to that target audience is highly dependent on their position in the funnel. So what that implies is that matching algorithms that take too long to analyze data that's too old simply are not good enough. Only by maximizing the performance of your matching algorithm are you able to maximize relevance and therefore campaign performance. So again, another example of a scenario in which marketing in real time creates value, right, for marketers. Lastly, we have the bidding problem. So marketers have been bidding in online auctions for search engine keywords for years now. We now have the ability to bid in real time on display advertising across large-scale ad exchanges. The exchange-based media buying model is only increasing in popularity. And this is important because it means that predictive analysis techniques are now required in order to optimize media buying. This chart shows an example of how price-volume forecasting can be used to predict the optimal bid in order to maximize the profitability of a campaign. And it's yet another example of a scenario in which increasing analytic performance in order to market in real time, it creates business value for marketers. So that's it, right? So in summary, as a marketer, if you leverage your human capital, your data, and your technology, you solve these 4 problems, life is good. You can go home. It's just that easy. You're marketing in real time. I don't want to oversimplify the challenges involved here. But fortunately, this is an area where some of the most innovative marketers in the world are focused today, and we're fortunate to have one of them with us who's agreed to join me on stage and discuss this in more detail. So at this point, I'd like to invite Leon Zemel, the Chief Analytics Officer from X+1, to join me on stage and share some of his specific experiences leveraging large-scale data analysis technology in order to market in real time. So thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Well, I'm not sure I look exactly like that picture of Hal Varian from Google that you put up there, Brad, but I am somehow allowed to be the Chief Analytic Officer at X+1. I want to thank Brad for sharing his session with me. Congratulations on all the great success that you're having over at Netezza, and personally in leading really the growth engine and the digital media world over there. I am really excited about getting to present with Brad and Netezza because of the value in the relationship and partnership that we've had together. And I think that all starts with this shared vision that we've all been talking about. I didn't realize how well coordinated we were going to be from start to finish here, but from John to Bruce to Brad, it's all about achieving big marketing success, big growth for your digital channel, and that does take intelligent access and utilization of big data. So what do we mean? We've been talking about numbers, but we're also going to try to make this real and talk about it in practice. First of all, what we don't mean by big data, just to contrast to some of the things we see out there in the market, one thing for sure we don't mean is performance reports and spreadsheets coming out of your ad server. We also don't mean single variable reports, looking at one attribute, the income, the in-market readiness, just one specific attribute about a user, and making a purchase on one specific data element. I think we've all learned that consumers are much more complicated than any one single data element can detail. Finally, we know that marketers want performance. But unfortunately, some small data approaches have led to last click, last view attribution, and as Brad has been talking about, that important attribution problem that we all know just doesn't make marketing sense. So where has that led us as an industry? What have we been seeing out there where some of these small data approaches have created challenges for marketers? Well, for one thing, we see a lot of marketers getting hyper-focused. How many of us have seen, or even maybe, dare I say, managed media plans that just focus on a very small niche market, that just get down to the remarketing audience, the in-market audience? And then how many of us, or I would believe probably all of us in this room, as consumers, have probably been on the other end, being bombarded by the same exact ad over and over again, just because we visited a website? As to be expected, this strategy doesn't scale for marketers. You're targeting the same small group again and again. And for consumers that really do want to find out about your products and services but just haven't made it to your site, you're not giving them any aid as well. On the other extreme, and maybe even in reaction to that suboptimal strategy, we see some marketers going the other side and actually falling into the most dangerous pitfall in marketing, which is by buying reach and scattering it with very low frequency, marketing just doesn't reach the threshold to have any chance at driving impact with the consumers. Again, with all the last few attribution analysis out there, it leads to believe that this might actually be working. But we all know that consumers are just not going to change brands or switch what products and services they're using just because they saw one display ad. Some of the symptoms we see that really detect that our media plans are really somewhat suboptimal in one of these directions. So two main symptoms. One is, in our ad server, starting with the small data, looking at what we call so-called attributed conversions, we see it topping out. How many people in this room, how many marketers in this room, just can't find any more outlets to invest money cost-effectively and with a positive ROI? The even bigger symptom, an even bigger challenge, and really the basic question that we all have to answer is how are our digital investments, marketing investments, driving our overall digital sales? And unfortunately, with some of these suboptimal approaches that are either too focused or too broad-reaching but with low frequency, the results are not that reassuring. We see a disconnect or lack of correlation, as I'm a chief analytic officer, between the digital investments and what we're seeing attributed to the channel, and then when we look at it in terms of an overall digital P&L view. Fortunately, we found a better approach, and that's what I want to take you through today, an approach that we've taken many of our big clients through. As Bruce said, it really is a journey. So I'm taking you through here a part of that journey that we've taken one of our large clients through over the last 12 to 18 months, and that's really reflective of many of the issues that need to be solved and that we've been able to solve in market. So our client came to us with a mass of uncultivated user interactions, log files, website analytic data, customer data. And they had a very simple problem to solve. How do I bridge the gap from all that data that seems so valuable and get to where I want to go in terms of my business growth? How do I develop that sprawling and growing virtual metropolis of digital customers? Well, as you've heard across the morning, that road to cross that gap is obviously paved with synchronizing big data. We can't get at the data if it isn't organized in some fashion that can be analyzed and that we can leverage for insights and value in our marketing. However, if you got 10 engineers in a room and asked them, how do you synchronize data and what's the best way to do it, I think you'd pretty much get about 20 answers. So what is the best approach for the marketer? So what we did with our client and what we see really works in market is to focus all that data integration, synchronization, mining, predictive analytics on two core marketing principles. To first start with the consumer and what audience they're in, what are their needs, and then to determine, based on that, how can we impact those needs? What type of marketing do they need? What type of messages do they need? What level of marketing investment and interactions will really move the consumer along the purchase funnel? So here we go on the journey. First, as I said, it starts with the consumer, bringing in all those audience demographics and attributes. So on every interaction, as Brad said, in real time, updating who the consumer is, what they look like. Do they have kids? Do they have a high-income household? What type of neighborhood do they live in? As well as all different third-party data sources that are readily available in the market. What lifestyle segment are they in? What types of interests do they have? So once we bring all that data together in that audience-focused way, we're able to determine the initial segments that really drive this approach. And because it's so critical to get that segmentation correct, there's a few key success factors. And I think if you talk to people in the room that are practitioners of this, the Ken Rona, Louis Steckler, the people that have been doing this in the market, you'll hear a few key success factors. One is that it took, in this case, at least a half dozen different data sources. There's no one data source out there that can really give you big data. And what we mean by that in this case is coverage across the internet population, where you really can find hundreds of people and really flag key data elements that define whether they're in your target audience. The next factor is to determine, when you have multiple data sources, the accuracy and which data source to prioritize. So if you get the data element from 6 different sources, which one are you going to take? Which one are you going to use in your models and to target? And then finally, and really most important, is to take a multidimensional approach. And that's the real vast difference from the small data approach, is to combine all that data to really give you a robust profile of who the consumer is and what their needs are. So where all that data ended up in terms of sort of one dimension of audience, I give a few examples here. It came up with many different segments that had many different needs for how our client needed to market to them. A few examples, which are very relevant for folks out here, for example, in the auto industry. If you're selling cars or any auto-related products, auto insurance, auto loans. We have on the left there an urban dweller. This is a moderate income person living in an apartment, no car, probably no plans for a car anytime soon. Just not in your target audience. Moving along that spectrum, we have the recent or soon-to-be college grad who might be buying her first car. She's going to be very different than that final segment on the page, which is the family guy. The guy that's had 2 cars in his driveway all along, who's going to need a lot more messaging and marketing to convert to a different product. The other key dimension, as Brad was saying in terms of the purchase funnel, is to assess audience behavior. There's so much data out there that shows you what the audience really wants. We have hundreds of millions of impressions for just this one client across their site visits, their search activity, clicks on their banners, where they're being seen in media. And all that data can indicate just where the consumer is in terms of how soon they're likely to purchase. Another key piece here in terms of consumer behavior is product signups. Who are the people that actually have done this before, who are high value? By using that data together with all this other audience data in terms of demographics and interests, we're able to build lookalike segments to really expand the coverage and find similar audiences that might very well be in the same state in the purchase funnel and have very similar needs. Adding that layer of behavior to our segments from before, for example, the recent college grad, maybe Harvard, considering where we are, now we have a different picture of her. Is she going to, before we said she might likely be buying a car sometime soon, but now if she's searched, if she's visited a car shopping site, we have a much stronger indication. We can really estimate with really good precision how likely she is to be buying a car anytime soon. And now for Brad, we start to get to the really big data. And this is where we really use the muscle of Netezza. So just for this single client, we collect 5 billion or more monthly impressions across all their marketing activity online. And it really is critical that we say all marketing activity to really assess the attribution analysis, to really assess how we can drive incremental audience impact. We need to see all the touches that are being supplied to that consumer. As everybody, I think, has said this morning, it's really about breaking down silos. 2 of the key ones are brand versus performance. Now, the most interesting part of this case study and this journey with this client is that breaking down the silos didn't take a hammer. It didn't take restructuring or reorg. By putting a consumer marketing framework focusing on the audience and what is needed for audience impact, we were able to provide a centering framework that both brand and performance clients, both people at the client and at their agency, were able to all rally around, to able to see where they fit in, how their campaigns come together. And it's all about one view towards business results. Once we were able to line up all those billions of impressions and interactions against that very predictive segmentation, we were able to start to determine the key factors in marketing in terms of the message, in terms of the volume of message. Here's one example of one of the analyses that's really key, is in terms of what we call the optimal frequency range, which is really important to do by segment. As we said in the examples before, the family guy with the 2 cars is going to need a lot more marketing to be moved to switch. This analysis, when looking across the entire marketing interaction data, by segment, by user, without sampling, even though I like the beer analogy, really was able to get us to determining the optimal frequency range for a given user. And it really overcame last view attribution. None of this was driven off of, did they click or view an impression, 10 impressions after they started. This is viewing from the beginning of time in the marketing relationship across all the interactions we've had with them and determining, was there really an incremental impact? Now, as we said up front, what we see in the market and what we saw in this case was a few areas or opportunities for optimization. When it came to the remarketing group, we saw that all those people, as to be expected, were way beyond the optimal frequency range. People that could be touched very few times with maybe a couple high-impact messages and convert were being bombarded. On the other hand, at higher end of the funnel, at more awareness segments, we saw the opposite extreme, where users were really at that low end, 1 or 2 touches. People that needed at multiple touches to be convinced were just not being impacted. Again, that pitfall of non-impactful marketing. And again, the other piece here is that the target audience composition within that was also way below where it needed to be. We just weren't hitting the right target. So what did we do to change the situation? So there were really 2 parts of how we optimized. First of all, the reality of marketing, even though we all talk about the real-time bidded world, the exchanges, as John said, it's really about the entire marketing plan. And so much of that marketing plan was in traditionally bought media, what we're calling here negotiated media, where an agency or advertiser negotiates an insertion order with a publisher. So what we were able to do is line up all those hundreds of publishers and media sources and placements against these 2 key dimensions, against audience composition and in terms of audience impact, or really where they were overlapping. Which placements were hitting the same consumers, which were hitting exclusive reach and finding new users. We were then able to apply mathematical models to actually optimize that, to look at that entire plan and move dollars to where they needed to go to increase the target audience composition and to maximize how many people are really being hit with that optimal frequency range. The outcome of that model was specifics around how much to spend on each media source and with what frequency cap. As a result, the client's agency was then equipped with all the data they needed to go and optimize their negotiated media plan.
At the same time, and very complementary to the negotiated media, we were able to fill in gaps in the real time. We were able to directly focus and target a better audience composition and to move people to the optimal frequency range across the plan. By bidding higher at people that were below that optimal frequency range, to really find those people
and get impressions in front of them to really be able to have an impact. And at the same time, reducing our bids against either people not in the target audience or that were beyond that range. Really shifting the entire media plan, both across real-time and negotiated media, into more of that sweet spot. So what kind of results did we see? First, before we get to the good part, and I think the part that everybody looks at, there was a really important beginning of those results, which we call the calibration period. As we said before in the very beginning, the biggest challenge was that there wasn't any correlation. We weren't able to see when we invested marketing dollars that it drove an impact on total digital sales. So during that calibration period, we really shifted the client's whole view of how they were managing media in market. shifted from a last view CPA performance-based optimization plan to a full scorecard of looking at how consumers in different segments across the funnel were migrating and moving and being impacted. The other piece is by actually investing against those recommendations and against all those outcomes of the analysis, we were able to see and calibrate that as we put more dollars into market, it really had an upward effect on sales. We weren't yet ready to really make the big investments because we really needed to test. We needed to move from analysis that might be correlation-based, and we really needed to prove that there was a causal effect, that we put dollars in and we get total digital sales out. Once we had that really straightened out, we were able to find opportunities to significantly invest in with really positive ROIs and grow the total digital sales channel. The important note here is, I think, historically, it's one of the, particularly in these small data environments, we all talk about lift in response rate, lift in conversion rate. What we're talking about now is lift in the total digital channel, in their total digital sales. And we're really seeing big year-over-year impacts in big businesses. So a few key takeaways that I hope everybody took away from that and like you to walk away with today. First of all, it is about big data, but there are really some centering principles of how to unlock the value from that marketing data. It really comes down to identifying key audiences and then balancing your marketing strategy and investment against those audiences to really determine what impact and what is needed to impact them. And as we've all been saying, we are in a world where through real-time marketing, we can really make that really efficient and more effective. Also, I think some of us that have been around marketing across multiple channels for the last 15, 20 years have always really wanted control. We just want to be able to manage our frequency, manage our target audience. And I think with all the enablement out there today, that control is really here. Marketers can really control who they're hitting, how much frequency they're hitting, and then measure the impact of it. And lastly, the companies that have made this change, that have taken the risk of moving away from the simple, the sort of enabled by common technologies, platforms, where they've moved away from the CPA near-term performance impact to really looking at the total impact on their business, have really garnered significant gains. Thank you. I think Brad, just want to invite Brad to close up.
You stay up here. So thanks, Leon. And congratulations on your success. That's a great success story. I had just one closing thought before we take questions, which is, as we look across our customer landscape, what we see is that marketing organizations inevitably climb a maturity curve over time with respect to their ability to leverage increasingly sophisticated classes of data analysis in order to create business value. And so, BI reporting and ad hoc analysis inevitably lead to predictive analysis and ultimately to machine learning and optimization. And the universal truth that we see is that the firms that are able to climb that maturity curve the fastest are the ones that win. And I think what we all just heard in Leon's success story is that X+1 is a great example of a company that's doing exactly that. So thanks for sharing that. And yeah, absolutely. So now I think we may have a minute to take questions if there are any. If there aren't, we'll get out of your way.
Here we go.
It was very interesting. I was wondering, though, using the example of automotive, if you're talking about digital sales, how do you follow that? In other words, most people don't buy cars online, so the trick, and maybe you've gotten to that point, is to correlate or track the particular individual to the dealer, right, and then move it back. But there's obviously a lot of sales aren't done online, so by bracketing digital sales, you beg the question, how do you deal with offline sales?
Sure. Great question. I think the majority of our clients have a component of their business that's offline. There are multiple ways to deal with it. One is very directly. Like in the case of auto, part of those sales can actually be connected directly to what's happening online. So for instance, if someone requests a quote or a dealer visit online, there are ways through lead management to take in that offline data and actually optimize everything we've been talking about directly towards what you're seeing in the offline. At the same time, for some of that activity, there isn't the direct connection. It is a little bit more correlative at first, where you're looking at activity that's happening online, looking at it by different cuts of segments, of regions, of localities, and then looking at that effect on the total, not just digital sales, but really whether it's having a net offline impact.
Well, how about bringing that to the top of the funnel and tracking over here, Leon?
Where was that?
You're right.
What? Oh,
How you
sorry.
doing? How about tracking the top of the funnel and tracking offline advertising, for example, and then having that feed into your cross-channel attribution?
Can you explain the question a little bit more?
So how do you track offline advertising and have it feed into your cross-channel attribution? This question was about how do you get the sale. I mean, if you had like a unique identifier and fed it back into your advertising and match it to a cookie, then that's one way. But how do you get it at the top of the funnel and say, I know that this magazine is feeding X number of conversions, for example?
Right. I would actually hold that question for this afternoon. I think John Vane is going to do a really good job of focusing on that.
Hey, Leon. Oh, sorry. No, I guess I have the mic. Hey, Leon, thanks for the mention. One question on the calibration side. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing in the calibration? Because it looked at that point that things were tracking pretty carefully, much more so than the old way. Can you talk a little bit about just high level, what the methodology is there?
Sure. And it obviously differs based on what the analysis shows. It really comes down to after you've done that thorough analysis. So although we've been talking about real time, that first time does take a little bit of upfront investment and time to figure out really what's working and how the marketing funnel works for a specific client. Once you have that analysis, putting that in market with real levels of investment. Obviously, Ken, you're coming from a statistical background, so obviously in details, there's levels that really need to be put in market to really determine that. But by really putting those in market and tracking them, it really comes down to some testing against some big investments against those recommendations. In this case, we were fortunate to see a pretty close connection between the upfront analysis and then what happened in market. So some others, it might take a little bit more longer calibration period as well.
That one right there.
Okay. Question for you, Leon. There's this period of time in your chart where there's sort of pre-calibration where there's a mess.
Right.
And then there's calibration, and then you've got that upward slope. And thinking about what Bruce said earlier, where a chief marketing officer's life cycle is 18 to 24 months. There's something, and I'm oversimplifying and I want to get you to comment it,
Right.
that maybe switched at the client side for them to see that what was going on in the pre-calibration stage wasn't working, and they wanted to get to what was on the opposite side
Right.
of the calibration stage.
Yeah.
What were some of the things, which could include a new staff at the client or new processes? What were some of the pressures and things at the client that made them say, you know what, we need to change the way that we're doing things, and we're going to give you guys a chance to calibrate us to get to where we want to go?
I think there was a little push and pull there. I think on the client side, fortunately in this case, it was a little bit more consistency. So it was a more ongoing client, not someone that had been swapped out after 12 months, as well as with their agency. So they had basically seen what we talked about earlier in the presentation about they really had seen it topping out. They really didn't have outlets or channels to focus on, to really invest in. And they knew that they were a large business. They needed to grow to really make an impact on their business. So that was really the driver. At the same time, we were actually part of the media plan. So we were seeing it in real life. We were seeing this to come to fruition. And based on those symptoms we just talked about, we were able to identify pretty quickly that was the underlying issue. We didn't have all the data. They didn't bring all their data to us right away. But even in our small slice of the pie, we were able to see some of those indicators. And after reviewing that with the client and their agency, we were able to dig deeper and then really do the more thorough, full-on big data analysis that we've been talking about.
So I think the clock is saying our time.
Hi, this is a question for Brad. You touched on collecting complete information to make accurate decisions as opposed to sampling. Can you go into a little more detail on that?
Sure. So sampling is a technique that can be very appropriate. It's a statistical analysis technique that's appropriate for certain classes of problems, but in the digital world, you're dealing with very large data volumes, and oftentimes the data is sparse in nature. And the point that I was attempting to make is just one example of a scenario in which sort of legacy, older approaches to making big data less awkward to deal with doesn't work in a digital context, because you've got the potential really to throw away very valuable data. You introduce, in some cases, sampling error, but the specific example that I was giving was in the case of attribution analysis. If you're throwing out 9 out of every 10 impressions, you might be throwing out really important impressions, right, that are going to guide your decision making in important ways. And so just one example. There are actually many examples of sort of legacy approaches to analyzing very large data sets that break with web scale data. And that's why the higher level point that I wanted to make was that there was an inflection point in technology innovation that occurred ballpark 5-7 years ago that enabled engineers to analyze much larger data sets with much less awkwardness, much higher performance. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right. I think our time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.